Okay. Good tunes. All right, well, I want to thank everyone who's tuned in with us live right now. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us on this wonderful Saturday evening. What a beautiful day we were having. I guess we're still having it technically, so we shouldn't use a past tense. So tonight we're all going to do a similar thing like we did last Saturday. If you were with us last Saturday, this was sort of an open forum. So if you're watching us online, my wife Erin is actually monitoring the chat section on Facebook and YouTube. So if you have a question surrounding the concept of death, we're talking about death versus life tonight. If you have a question around that, you can put it into the chat there, and Erin is going to sort of raise her hand and let me know that there's a question that pops up. Last week, I think we had a total of 1 question come in. Two questions that came in. So we'll see if we can break a record tonight and get to 3. That'd be amazing. I have plenty of notes of stuff I can babble on about, but if you have something specific you'd like me to talk about, I'd be happy to try to go there. Let's see, what else do I need to say before we get going here? I think that's about it, but I do want to let you know and remind you that we are still doing everything we're doing here at Unity of Boulder, but without an audience. So we still have the same expenses that we have usually throughout the year. So if you at some point during this talk or at the end feel moved by what you've heard, we invite you to make a contribution, and we'll talk more about that at the end, but just didn't want to miss that opportunity now. All right. So I'm going to dive right into it here, and I'm going to pose some questions, and I really invite you, if you're watching us right now, to take these questions into your consciousness and really consider them. If perhaps maybe this is the first time you've thought about them or never thought about them, this is a good opportunity. So here's the first question. What is the proper age to die? Think about that. What is the proper age to die? Have you ever actually asked yourself that question? I think there's a lot of assumptions in our society, a lot of assumptions in the medical system, a lot of assumptions in our culture, but has anyone ever set what is the proper age to die? And I want you to really be thinking about that word, the proper age to die. Which goes to really saying, what is the proper length of a life? How long is a life supposed to be? I know we have sayings like that was, they left too soon when someone dies, or they left too early, or they didn't leave soon enough, whatever the case may be. But we put these sort of time-framed expectations on a life. And we just use them as this sort of rash generalization, like we all agree how long someone is supposed to live. So how many years are you supposed to live in a physical life? Has anyone ever set that specific determination? We have a lot of things in our world, especially in our medical system, which are built around an assumption that we've all agreed how long someone's supposed to live. But have we ever set that as a society, as a culture, consciously, to say, this is how long someone is supposed to live? Now, if you have a year in mind that you're thinking about, maybe you're thinking, oh, well, once you're past 75 or 80 or 85 or 90, you know, that's sort of the time you can check off the planet. Who would set this number, really, though? If we were to get together and you're thinking about your own life, who's going to set the number for your life when it's okay for you to go? Is it going to be your family sitting around and deciding, you know, we think it'd be okay when you go at this age? Or is it going to be yourself saying, you know, I want to go at this age. I think this would be the proper length of life for me. Is it going to be society sort of gets together and says, you know, here's the average age that you should go, so this is probably when you're going to go? Should it be your doctors that are analyzing your health? Should they decide when you die? Should it be politicians coming up together with a nice round number of when they think most people will and should die, and that's an okay lived life? They've lived enough life that we can let them go without guilt or fear or worry. So here's really what it's going to boil down to as you're pondering this concept in your head. How long do you have to live in a physical life to have fulfilled your purpose for that life? That's really what we're talking about here. How long would you have to live in a physical life to fulfill the purpose of that life? Well, now that gets a little bit more interesting. One, because very few people probably even realize what the purpose of their life is. So that makes it very difficult then to decide whether they have or have not fulfilled that purpose. And two, your purpose isn't necessarily set by you. You may not be aware of what your purpose is, primarily because you didn't design your purpose for being here. You as a physical being. Now, you as a spiritual being probably are very clear about what your purpose is for this lifetime. But you as a disconnected physical entity have forgotten and are completely unaware of what your purpose is for this lifetime. So then, having wrapped our head around that, how can me, as a physical person who's completely forgotten my purpose for being here, determine how long I'm supposed to be here? When it's okay for me to go, when it's too soon for me to go, when I've outlasted my stay, how could I possibly know if I'm not even sure what my purpose is or aware of the entity that created my purpose? So you hear oftentimes when someone dies, let's say before 25 years old, we pretty much, as a society, agree they went too soon, they went too young. Who are we to say that? Who are we to determine that that person went too soon? Do we have any concept of what their purpose was on this planet? No. From a selfish standpoint, from a physical limited standpoint, we're looking at it, I would have liked to have spent more time with that person, so I'm going to say they went too soon. But that's really not our position to be in, to judge when someone goes too soon. And do we really have a right to look at someone and just because they're on in years, they're later in years, maybe in their 80s or 70s, 80s or 90s or somewhere around there, that we can say, oh, well, they must have fulfilled their purpose because they got older, so it's okay for them to go. You got two fingers up. What does that mean? Good question. Okay.
Is it okay to end your life if the quality of life is gone? Can't see, can't hear, can't move, can't eat solid food? That's the first one.
Why don't we just start with one of the most difficult questions that has to do with death. So here's the question. Is it okay to end your life when the quality of life has gone? And I thought about this question because I thought it could come up. And I'm going to say one thing. We are not here to end lives. It is not our role to end a life, period. If life is ending and we allow it to happen, then that is the natural course of things. But we are not here, we are not put here to end a life, including our own or somebody else's. But this is where it gets ridiculous in our society. You go to a hospital with an illness, and we'll call it a life-threatening illness, as we've deemed it in this society. And that hospital, that doctor, that medical assistant, I'm using rash generalizations here, so let's not say my doctor would never do this, my hospital, I'm using rash generalizations here. Their job is to keep you alive basically for as long as they possibly can, using whatever tools and drugs and chemicals and systems they can do that. That's the presumed reason you went to that hospital, you went to that doctor, is to keep me alive as long as you possibly can. Going back to the fact that we don't really know when it's time to go. We just pretty much have a presumed system in our society that you're supposed to live as long as you possibly can, because we don't accept death as a part of life, as a part of the cycle of life. So most people, I'm going to, again, assume, to get back to this question, when they've reached a place where the quality of life has diminished so far, it's likely that their life is being kept going by the pharma, by the machines, by the doctors, by the systems that have put in place to keep you alive. If we're in a situation that we're fighting for our lives, using the tools and systems in place to try to keep us alive as humanly possible, as long as we possibly can, completely negating the concept of quality of life, then we've sort of pulled ourselves out of the natural cycle of life. And now we're in a system which doesn't exist with morality, with conscience, with actual care. It's a system built upon, we keep you alive as long as humanly possible. And once you're in that system, you technically don't have a right to die in many circumstances. There are some native traditions where when one of the elders felt that they had fulfilled their purpose, that their time on this planet was enough, they would just walk out into the forest and be done. They didn't sit around and burden the rest of the tribe trying to say, you got to keep me alive as long as you possibly can. I know I'm holding you back as we're trying to journey and pack up and move to the next location. I know I'm holding you back in everything we do. No, there was an honor in the fact that there was a wisdom and an in-touchness with their spirit and their purpose for why they came, because they had a spiritual awareness to be in touch with why they were there. And when they knew that purpose was fulfilled, they could just walk out and let the body go in the forest, unencumbered, uninhibited, whatever happened to them there. So we've put ourselves into a fake system which causes this suffering and this prolonged pain and this prolonged illness. And then when we're in it, we go, do I have a right to end my own life? No, but you have a right to step out of that system and let life do what it does naturally. What was the other question worse than that one?
Unrelated.
Unrelated, oh good.
In your studies, have you found a common link in the major world religions, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, etc., that explains or outlines living your life in preparation of the next existence?
That's just a small question. Take all the world religions and surmise their death process and life process. No. It does fascinate me. No, oh yeah, restate the question, okay. Basically the question is saying, in my studies of looking at all the various religions, from Islam to Christianity to Buddhism, Hinduism, is there a commonality between how we live our lives and how that transitions into the afterlife? Is that in preparation for the afterlife? So we actually talked about this in our men's group a few nights ago, which is a fascinating concept to me. Well, first I'll say, what I love about all the world religions since the beginning of time is that they've tried to figure out what's happening after death and to rationalize it from a standpoint of where they're standing in life. So in many cases, here we are, human beings, having this physical experience, we're in life, and we recognize, all right, in physical life, if I do something wrong and my parent is there, I get punished for that. If I do something wrong in my community, my society, my tribe, whatever it is, the tribe might punish me for that. We have a direct ramification in society. When I do things, there are ramifications for that. So in many cultures, and I am connecting the different religions here, and you see this across many religions, from Buddhism to Christianity, there's a concept of a punishing afterlife to keep you to act good in this life. And from my perspective and from my awareness in my studies, this spawns from the idea and the perception that if I'm standing in a physical world where we punish wrong actions, my mind tries to say, well then rationally, in the afterlife, it's the same. God has set up this scenario, or the divine has set up this scenario, where I'm going to be punished in the afterlife just like I was punished in the physical life for wrongdoing. And that is a flawed concept as I've come to understand it, and I've studied these different religions and I've looked at this. There is no such thing as a loving divine father or mother or creator that creates a scenario for suffering after death upon you. Now, I want to make that clear. There's no scenario where this divine creator is waiting for you after death, or its angels or its legions of demons or whatever you want to call it are waiting for you to punish you for the things you did wrong. And I struggled with this for decades in my study because it seemed to pop up in so many different religions that yes, in fact, there is this sort of hellish possibility in the afterlife if you didn't live your life properly in this life. And it never resonated with me. It never made sense to me. And so I read, and I'm trying to find more correlations and more things to explain this and go deeper and deeper. Until finally I started studying Hinduism and the concept of karma. And it finally started to make sense. The only reason there would be suffering after I die is if I've taken it with me. God, the divine, the mother, father, creator, isn't sitting there going, all right, that was bad, there's -1, that was bad, -2, that was bad, -6. All right, when you get back here, well, you're almost at -10, I might as well just throw you into hell for suffering for the rest of your life. No. It's I've built up in my consciousness these triggers of suffering that still exist. I've had these experiences throughout my life. I've packed them into my subconscious and in my consciousness, these triggers of suffering, whether it's fear, doubt, envy, greed, pain. And I haven't dealt with them before I've died. So what happens? Do I think when I die they magically just abolish out of my consciousness? No. I've spent 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years implanting them in there. They travel with me into death, into the afterlife. So it is not an outside force coming upon me and saying, all right, well, you failed that lifetime, we got to send you back for another lifetime of suffering. But no, it is me and the consciousness and the awareness I have that is still trapped in the instances and moments in this physical life that I had, or even the past life before that, that drag me back into an incarnation because I'm still attached to incarnations. I don't know if that makes sense because it took a while for me to wrap my head around it. But I'll try to explain it again this way. If I'm still attached to, we'll just use a broad generalization of money. I was greedy in this life. I was always going after money. I was still in the money. Going after money. And when I died, I had not overcome my attachment to money. As I go into the afterlife, I still have an attachment to this thing we call money, or this thing we call trying to buy other things into the afterlife, and that attachment is what pulls me back into another incarnation. Because I'm attracted back into that physical experience of trying to have more money, so I am pulled into another incarnation. It's not that I was forced back into that incarnation, but I'm pulled back into it by my desire of those physical things that I did not eradicate before I died. So that is what the spiritual practice is as we live, going back to address this question, is trying to detach, trying to resolve, trying to heal all those pain bodies, all that stuff that's in our shadow. We talk about our shadow work, to clear all that garbage out so that upon death, I don't have any of that baggage going into afterlife. I'm awakened going into afterlife. And in the study of the self-realization fellowship path that was created by Paramahansa Yogananda, the guru, he talks about the very last moment of your life determines what happens after you die. He's talking about the very last second of your life determines what happens after you die. And he goes into such a specific description to say, one of our biggest fears, our biggest physical attractors that hold us into this body is breath. Suffocation is one of the worst things that a human can go through. Losing the breath is one of the most difficult processes for a human to go through. And it's interesting that one of the first things we do when we're born is we take a breath and we come into that physicality of having to breathe. And so this path talks about suffocation is one of the most difficult things for us to overcome. And on that last moment, on your deathbed, the last thing that happens to you is your last breath and the fear of suffocation, of losing that breath. And so that almost every single person who passes on with fear. because of that last moment of suffocation, of that last breath. There's a concept of, I'm suffocating, I'm dying, and they go into the next realm with that thought. And that's what's going to drag them back into another incarnation, because they're still attached to the breath and the fear of losing that breath, which creates our physicality. So on that path, you spend a lot of time throughout your life working with the breath to overcome the breath so that you can stop, start, move beyond the breath. And the whole concept is, at the moment of death, at the exact moment of death, if you can be only focused on God, there's no fear of suffocation, there's no fear of feeling of loss because you're losing your family members, there's no expectation of finding your family members in the afterlife, there's none of that. There's no thought in your consciousness of anything, none of the pain and suffering you've gone through throughout that life. The only thought, if the only thought is God, then you merge directly into God. Any other thought but God in that exact moment of death brings you back into another incarnation. And it would take a lifetime and possibly lifetimes of work to be able to achieve having nothing but a thought of God at that exact moment of death. Any other questions? Okay.
What's Unity's stance on reincarnation, heaven, and hell?
Well, in the broad general sense, Unity, so here's the question. What is Unity's stance on reincarnation, heaven, and hell? So in the broad sense, heaven and hell are experiences to be had here in this lifetime. Both heaven and hell are states of awareness, states of consciousness that we go through throughout our lives, and that we are trying to achieve heaven on earth in this lifetime, to have a heavenly experience here in this physical life, and to get less and less of the hellish experiences that you can have in a lifetime, which come with pain, greed, suffering, anger, the 7 deadly sins, whatever you want to call it. All those things that come from the ego create or the lower ego create the hellish experiences of consciousness, where we are judgmental of other people, where we are judgmental of ourselves, where we are mean, where we are cutting people off in traffic. Those are hellish experiences. And we're trying to create more heavenly experiences and bring ourselves into the heavenly consciousness in this state of being right now. And it's funny because if you were to do that in a lifetime, you'd be doing the same thing I just talked about in the self-realization fellowship path. You'd be moving more and more to only having a heavenly consciousness throughout your life and less hellish experiences throughout your life, so that by the end of your life, you would burp. No, by the end of your life, you would be in a consciousness of heaven. So that when you died, all you would be thinking of is the divine, and you would transition into the divine at that moment. So there's a lot of correlations there in that process. The other question was reincarnation. So yes, the Fillmores did, our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, did believe in reincarnation. They wrote and spoke about it a fair amount. And they talked about, Myrtle Fillmore specifically, talked about, and for her, she might have believed she was actually in her last incarnation, and I believe that would be correct. Because for her, she knew when she was going to die. She knew exactly when she had fulfilled her physical purpose here on earth, and she actually told her staff and she told her family members about a week out when she was going to pass on, even though she was in perfect health at the moment she was telling them. And she wrote letters to different people to let her know that she was going to start doing the work from the other side. And they called it the work, which is facilitating other people in their spiritual growth. She said she was ready to do the work from the other side, which would be on the spiritual realm, from the other side, to facilitate that process for others. And people were sad to see her go, but they recognized, those around her, that she was of that guru, enlightened teacher status, where she was ready to just let this body go so she could do an even greater work from the other side. And Charles Fillmore talked a lot about reincarnation, but he was fixated and hell-bent on the concept of trying to create this heaven on earth experience in this body, in this lifetime, so he would never have to die. So that he would sort of transcend life itself in his current life, and that he would actually reverse the aging process in his own body and sort of do a reincarnation without dying, where he would actually regenerate his own body and be able to live indefinitely, similar to what we talked about, the guru Babaji, who did that in India, who lives perpetually as a young entity in a physical body that regenerates. But that was his concept, but he also knew that there was a possibility of reincarnation, that he'd be coming back and doing this work again and again as needed. Anything else? There are others? Okay. Well, this is how this is supposed to work. I get to ignore my notes and answer questions.
Do we write in exit points for this life in the book of records when we come to the world?
The question is, do we write in exit times in the book of record when we come into this world? I have a different opinion than well, here's the short and skinny of it. Every Unity minister gets to have their own opinion on how this whole thing unfolds, and from the studies they've done, where they've been led to, what they're called to, and they get to speak from that. And the great thing about that is all of us can say something different, and all of us can be right. So I'll speak from my own perspective and my own understanding as it pertains to this. I believe there's a lot of free will in this physical experience. I also believe there's a lot of free will in the spiritual experience. And I don't necessarily think that a soul ahead of time has so predetermined the experience in this physical life to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to die at 82 1/3, it's going to happen this way, and I'll leave the planet at that time. I believe there's a lot of variables in life. I believe we have the power and ability to adjust to these variables. I don't believe in a completely predestined life that step by step I'm basically just following a predestined pattern that I'm not creating as I go. I believe we are co-creators with the divine. I believe we can change our destiny. I believe we can create our own course and our own path. And I believe we can rise above the karma or the troubles or the issues that might have been with us from past lives. So I don't necessarily think a soul sits down and works out every step of the life into the point to say, this is when we're going to die, this is how we're going to be born, these are the parents we're going to go to. Maybe some of that takes place, but I think there's a lot of room for free will, because otherwise, what would be the purpose of coming here anyway? If it's all predestined, the soul goes, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing, the soul goes, well, maybe I don't need to do it because I already know what's going to happen. It's to come into this experience and see, can the soul, can the person overcome the tribulations and trials that it doesn't know are going to happen? Because it's easy to get through the things you know are going to happen, but it's the unexpected that creates the most growth. So if things we knew were going to happen and the soul knew it was going to happen, that's not an opportunity for growth. The opportunity for growth is the stuff we don't know is going to happen. Now, there might be a little impetus in the beginning to say, I'm going to be born to some parents in this region, because I believe that's going to be an opportunity that was different when I was born in this region. I don't know, and I really don't try to wrap my head around that stuff too much, because really it goes back to the perspective of a physical human being trying to understand the afterlife or the pre-life, and saying, all right, well, when I go to buy a house, I make a contract that has terms, and it has a start and end date, and it has things that are going to happen along the way when the payment balloons. So this contract thing must also happen in the afterlife. I don't think the afterlife is like this life so much. I don't believe there are contracts and set dates and start and end times. I believe there is no time. Everything is happening concurrently, so what would there really to be for a soul to say, I die at this time? That wouldn't make sense in that realm. The soul might just be there going, there's an impetus for more, which pulls them into an existence for more physical experience, because they still have a desire for more of the physical experience. Beyond that, I don't know if it gets that specific, but I don't feel like it does. I feel the soul is pulled back into the body because it has not dealt with issues from the past life of attachment to the physical experience, whatever part of that is, and then it has more experiences in this life to overcome, to grow, until it no longer is attached to this life. And it's not so complicated as contracts and deals with other souls and deals with this and that and the other thing. It's simply we have to overcome the desires of the flesh until we can evolve out of that. Is there more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any
So this is another area where I might differ from many other Unity ministers or teachers that are out there. The question, right. Are there tips for burning off karma that we may not be aware of? Right, good question. I don't think we're aware of really much of any of our karma. We're aware of the consequences of it. We're aware of the outcomes of it. Like we say, or someone might be, I'm always winding up in horrible abusive relationships or careers where I just can't advance, things like that, which we start to recognize as a pattern, which might be the outcome of some sort of karmic thing we're still holding on to as we came into this lifetime. But what it specifically was, maybe I was, a greedy ruler back in Egypt. Everyone started in Egypt apparently, but I was a greedy ruler back in Egypt, so I'm reaping the benefits of that in this lifetime where I can't ever have good money issues because I was so selfish back in those times. I think most of that stuff is really not necessarily. So getting back to the question, I don't think we really know any idea what karma we're dealing with. So it's really a fair system in that way, because you don't have to figure out specifically what karmically has been dragged into this life. All of us are on the same page. We simply have to transcend the garbage that is in our lives. We simply have to learn how to become more God-focused and less physically focused. Less so much on the how do I get more for me, how do I get more for what I want and the needs I think I need and the stuff I need to manifest, and start thinking about higher awareness and higher needs of those not only for us but those around us. So no matter what karmic thing you might be holding on to or dealing with, whether it's conscious, subconscious, or collective conscious, and you don't know what it is, the solution is the same. It's stepping a bit higher in awareness. As we get closer to God, as we get closer to what we call in Unity Christ awareness, or into that making heaven in this physical experience, we are burning away those karmic debts or those karmic issues as we do that. Regardless of what they were, regardless of how they happened, it doesn't necessarily matter. If I find myself having money problems, I need to deal with that. I need to deal with my lack consciousness. I need to deal with my greediness. I need to deal with my inability to see clearly on a direction to go. And as I move into a higher place and become less greedy, I become more aware of the abundance in this universe, I will be burning out that karma, if you want to use that term. But I'll be transcending above whatever I brought with me in this life. And it doesn't matter specifically what it was. It's just that I'm going through a spiritual process to elevate myself out of it. So we all have the same goal. We all have the same opportunity given to us. And it doesn't matter what happened in the past life. And all the religions, speaking of all the religions, there's so many religions, talk about God is forgiving. We just have to do the work to find God. And it is a natural forgiving power that embraces us when we come more into the awareness of God. It's not that God withholds the forgiveness. It's that we don't know how to receive it because we're so shut off from it in our physicality. When we raise our awareness, we step into the forgiveness that's already been waiting for us. And we burn off that karma. What else we got? Stock tips or nothing? All right, so I want to talk about what was happening in the world today. And a fascinating thing I see, and so this is from the book Living Between Two Worlds. Wow, I've been talking a long time, but I'm going to talk as long as I want. This is from Joel S. Goldsmith. He says, most people on earth have not even reached the stage of real conviction that there is God. They might say that they believe in God, but an absolute conviction that there is God, very few on earth have this. I think this is so pertinent to what's happening to us today. Do we really believe there is a God, that there is a divine, whatever term you want to put on it, that there is a divine mother, that there is a Gaia? Do we really believe there is a God? Because how we're acting in the world today would not reflect that. Would not reflect that we believe there is a divine plan, that there is a divine goodness moving in and through all things, pulling us in a certain direction. Our world would not reflect that. Because part of that is death. Death is a natural part of this process. And it seems to be the more we fight death, the more difficult our lives become. The more we fight nature, the more difficult our lives become. The more we fight the natural flow of life, the more difficult our lives become. So when we're watching the news today, and I pulled up some stats so I'd be current, 312,212 COVID deaths as of about an hour ago. 4,711,783 confirmed COVID cases. That means there are 4,399,571 COVID survivors. But what do we talk about? How many people have died? How many people have died? And by the way, there are 7.8 billion people on the planet today. And our system is set up to stop death. All we're talking about right now is how do you stop death? How can we stop death? How do we keep people from dying? But very little conversation is being had around how do we create quality of life for the most people? How do we create the most abundant opportunities for the most people? 7.8 billion people are wrapped up in this issue because we're fixated on death. Nobody's supposed to die in our world, apparently. We've determined nobody is supposed to die. It's a horrible thing. We've got to stop death as wherever we can. We've got to plug every hole of death as much as possible. It should never happen. Nobody should die. But everybody is dying. We're all dying the moment we're born. We are supposed to die. We are not supposed to be in this physical body living ignorant physical experiences for all eternity. We're supposed to have a moment where we pass on and get to reflect and go, oh, right, I'm a soul. Totally forgot. Now I have to go back and work out some stuff because I was such a moron in that physical life. And it doesn't matter if you were 1 month old, 10 years old, 30 years old, 80 years old, death is a part of life. It is a painful, miserable, suffering part for those of us that have to go through it and see it and be around it in the physical experience because we don't understand and believe in God. It is painful. I understand that. But that's only because we don't fully have the awareness to understand the concept of heaven and earth, the divine plan, and the process of life and death. We are supposed to be allowed to come and go. We are not supposed to be resisting it so insanely to try to stop it entirely, to even start uploading our consciousness into computers, because God forbid this special consciousness of mine should ever pass this planet because it was so perfect. Who could live without it? We are supposed to go at a certain period of time. And that is mostly out of our control, or should be, and was supposed to be. But that's a really hard one for us to wrap ourselves around and to accept. Because while we're in the physical experience, death seems like the enemy. Because it's painful, and it hurts, and it's hard to go through, and so then we just assume it's bad. But death is an absolute necessity. It's a necessity in every part of nature. And any part of nature that fights it suffers and creates more suffering upon itself. That's not to say we sit back and we let ourselves get killed by people, and we sit back and let ourselves get killed by bears, and let us sit back and let ourselves get killed by things. We have a natural instinct to survive. That is part of the ego. The ego's instinct is to survive, and is a powerful tool at many times in our life. But higher awareness should keep the ego in check to recognize when it's okay to allow death to happen. There's no reason to fear death if you actually believed you get to come back if you want and do this again. Or if you've raised to the awareness, you don't ever have to come back again because you go into eternal bliss and oneness with God and the divine and the Creator and whatever you want to call it. But this fear of death creates so much difficulty in our lives. What would the healthcare system look like in this country if we didn't have such a fear of death? Our lives would be totally different. And I was thinking about the movie The Wrath of Khan, the Star Trek movie The Wrath of Khan, with the famous line from Spock, where he says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. At some point, we have to start thinking like a collective consciousness, like an interconnected oneness on this planet, and start looking at things as a whole instead of from the individual. And you say, well, Shad, are you just going to sit there and let someone next to you die? No. Because my instinct is to help them to survive. And because in my own consciousness, as still a physical being, that is my instinct. But as the whole and the global awareness and the collective consciousness of all beings, we have to rise above just our knee-jerk reactions to save every little thing and try to get to live as long as humanly possible. We have to rise above that and get to a consciousness where we can go, this is a natural part of life. Have I really talked for 42 minutes? Have people just cursing on Facebook saying, please tell them to shut up? Is there anything else, or should we just wrap it? All right, I think you get the point. Is there anything here really with, ooh, this is good though. I'll read this. Speaking of the Fillmores. This is from the book, The Revealing Word, page 49. This is our co-founder, Charles Fillmore. And this is part of his definition of the word death. And he says, if through the power of our thought and word, we affirm the opposite of life and talk about the absence of life, we rob the body's cells of their natural element. This treatment will eventually bring death to the organism. Let us not say, I am tired, I am weak, I am sick. Rather, let us say, I am strong, I am well. I'm alive with the life of God now and forevermore. And so it is. Let's take a moment for some silence. I invite you, wherever you are in time or space, to allow yourself to close your eyes, to allow your shoulders to relax, to allow your breath to calm down, to allow your thoughts and concerns to melt away, and allow that sense of peace to just wash over you. There is a natural flow to life that if we can just find out where we're resisting it, life becomes so much easier. And so much of our resistance is wrapped up around this concept of fear. Fear of what could happen, fear of what might happen, fear of what is happening. But the natural flow of life says this is just part of the process. There is no such thing as an end. It is just a step in the process. You don't have to fight and resist and worry. You don't have to fight and resist and worry for others. And you don't have to convince them that they're not fighting and resisting and worrying enough. flow simply says, calm down, relax. This too shall pass. Learn to let go. Learn to be easygoing, to be a voice of calm and peace to those around you, to be optimistic, to be pointing out the blessings, to be walking in the light instead of campaigning for the darkness. It's not that you have to be unrealistic. It's just that you have to re-recognize what reality is. It is not the hype and drama that's all around you. It's much deeper and much higher than that. We have a right to flow. We don't have to resist. We're grateful that we've been given the freedom of this opportunity in a physical experience, that we are co-creators of this life, and that with our thoughts, our emotions, our focus, and our actions, we create our path and our experience. And what a true blessing it is that we've been given that power. So we go forth now from this time of silence and meditation with a commitment to use that power in the right direction, tonight and for the rest of this week. And so it is. Amen. So if you lasted this long, I appreciate you making it through this marathon talk on death. Talk about a talk that would never die, it just kept going, right? That's why I need a drummer. All right, well, I appreciate you being here, and I do hope that you will feel called upon to contribute to this experience, to this wonderful thing we call Unity of Boulder. It's not only touching your life, but touching the lives of all the people in this community, and actually around the world. We just had a gentleman from India email us saying he just found Unity through our live streaming, and he's been very moved and feeling it's the first time he's felt a connection to his spiritual self. And he's actually requesting to be a part of our singles group. I was like, awesome. Yes, we're planting Unity singles in India. Josh is very excited about that for some reason. All right, so there are many ways to give here at Unity of Boulder. You probably have a donate button right there on your screen wherever you're watching. If you can contribute that way, we really appreciate that. We also have the Text to Give and the Easy Tithe app. If you ever need to call us and set up recurring donations, that's also a big help to us to have stability from month to month, to have the recurring gifts. You can do that by calling our phone number at 303-442-1411. So I want to remind you that we do have the services tomorrow, 9 a.m. with Jack and Norma doing the meditative service, and then my sister Santisha at 11 a.m. doing her service. Then following her service at noon, we will be doing the fellowship on Zoom. So if you don't have the credentials for logging into Zoom, just email us at info@unityofboulder.com and we'll get you those. And we hope to see you all there. And please bring your questions and comments about the 3 talks that happened this weekend to that fellowship so we can have a meaningful discussion there with you. We look forward to seeing you and connecting with you and communing with you. All right. Well, thank you for being here and have a wonderful night.